With all the Nas videos I've made on this channel, you would probably think I'm a Jay-Z hater. That's not exactly the case. If I had to really think about it and break down my top 10 MCs of all time, this would be my list. For me, one of the most memorable points in Jay-Z's career came in 2001 with the release of The Blueprint. This would be the second official classic in Jay-Z's discography. Yeah, there are other albums you can call out that are pretty good, but I would say the 3 albums that are undeniable classics are Reasonable Doubt, The Blueprint, and The Black Album, with Reasonable Doubt being the undeniable best and The Blueprint being my favorite. If there's one thing we can agree on, there are a lot of elements that have to come together in order to make a classic album. Dope lyrics and beats are guaranteed to get you a hot album, but that wouldn't necessarily make it a classic. You have to bring something new to the table that has the potential to change the landscape of the genre. And with production from producers such as Kanye West and Just Blaze, they played a heavy hand in laying down the foundation for that landscape. In this video, I'm going to be going over one of the most iconic weekends in hip-hop history, one that arguably brought us the first great hip-hop album of the 21st century. This is Mr. Carter and the Blueprint Weekend. Let's go. At the start of 2001, Jay-Z was coming off of a 5-album run, with the peak being in 1998 with Volume 2 Hard Knock Life, a project that went 5 times platinum and earned Jay-Z his only Grammy for Best Rap Album. So at this time, this is the perfect moment to take a break, and that's exactly what Jay-Z planned to do. But then this happens.
Blueprint came out September 11th, so this had to have been, I guess, May or June. Jay walks into the studio like, anybody got some beats? I'm like, yeah, but you said you wasn't recording for like 6 months. He's like, yeah, I feel like rapping. And then he left.
And this is when Jay-Z gets a hold of Kanye's beat tape.
And hip hop, my manager, who definitely saved my life, was like, yo, play that one beat for Ho. And it came on, dun, dun, dun. And he was listening to it like, oh, it's crazy right here. Then they got to the chorus, and the chorus is like, ain't no love in the heart of the city. And he's like, oh, like doing his face like that. Then he's like, oh, play the next beat, play the next beat.
So at this point, the album is happening.
People think it's just a myth, but it's true. We did the majority of that album in 3 days. And then he came back with a CD from Kanye that had Never Change, and it was 3 songs from The Blueprint. And he walked in and recorded those back to back to back. And I noticed they all had this soulful feel. So he looks at me like, Just, what you got? And I'm like, shit.
On the fly, Just Blaze remembers a beat that he had created in inspiration to Ghostface Killah after listening to Supreme Clientele. The beat by itself was entitled Ghostfacer. So in that moment, Just Blaze makes a decision.
Like, I have one that works in this mix. Gave him the girls beat. And he's like, all right, what else you got? I got more raps. And I'm like, fuck. That day it was like, you'll find everything and anything that has horns and singing. I want to say I made that beat about 6 times. And it just so happened that as I was attacking it for the 7th time, Jay walked in and was like, turn my music high. And I'm like, yes. We're one song closer. And from there, it just kind of set everything in motion.
You can tell the pressure was on throughout this 2 to 3 day period. This spontaneous spark of inspiration from Jay-Z leading up to Kanye's beat tape is what helped bring out the spirit of competition within the production team.
But people talk about his energy of Blueprint of just creating so many songs so quickly. Like, what's your perspective of Jay's approach to putting the Blueprint together?
Oh man, it wasn't nothing quick about the Blueprint, first of all. Jay is quick. Once he hears it, it's not really too much else he needs.
I love how Young Guru and Just Blaze talk about the making of Song Cry.
Guru was looking at me like, yeah, that shit is whack. The singing makes no sense. That ooh, ooh, ooh. Wait, what is that?
We were in that Blueprint weekend, you know, right, where we were just vibing out, and you had started working on a record. The way you had the sample going, I was like, something's off about this, but I was adamant about it. I was like, Just, no, really. Like, normally I would just sit down and watch you make a beat, but I was listening, I'm like, Just, no, really. This is like, it sounds off. Like, why are you doing it? He's like, yo, Goo, just trust me.
It's fun to sit there and look at the Blueprint, because you do that in a weekend and it becomes this monumental record, and it's like watching Just make beats back to back to back. That was fun.
I think Jay walked in and he heard the beat and he laid the rhyme that night.
Right.
And just immediately, that's how fast we was doing them blueprints. Right. He laid the rhyme that night, so that by the time Jay came back the next day, it completely sounded like what's on the album is completely different than what he laid the rhyme to. So he just looked and was like, this dude is a genius.
JAYZ was dropping quotables all throughout this record. The biggest one from Song Cry is when a good girl's gone bad, she's gone forever. And we don't have to stop there. In H to the Izzo, we get the classic quote, I'm overcharging niggas for what they did to the Cold Crush. And this is one of the last beats that Kanye introduced to Jay before the weekend was over.
He was about to leave out the room, and he had played the songs. He's like, yo, after this song, Guru, I'm going to the lounge. I was like, yo, I got one beat to play. I gotta play you this beat. So then he's like, okay, you know what I'm saying? I put it on. He just started bobbing his head to it. Like, let me give you one of them looks, like, that's how you know you got a heat rock. Let me give you that right there. So then, maybe about 2 or 3 minutes later, I don't know, you know, it was like this. He just tapped me on the shoulder. He said, H to the Izzo, V to the Izzy, for shizzle my nizzle used to dribble down the VA. What was all the words gonna be? Because all we had was for shizzle my nizzle used to dribble down the VA. So he's like H to the Izzo, V. So 2 minutes later, we trying to come up with the in-between words, right? He said, that's the anthem, get your damn hands up. I said, oh, shit.
After 5 successful projects, JAYZ knew that he was at the top of his game during this period. He even used it as an opportunity to call out some of his contemporaries in the legendary diss track Takeover. And this is what led up to one of the most iconic rap battles of all time. According to Just Blaze, the Blueprint weekend would have taken place sometime in May or June in 2001. This lines up with the information we get from Wikipedia with the exception of July. On June 28, 2001, JAYZ performs at Summer Jam and releases the first half of Takeover. Some sources say that he went back into the studio and added the additional verse that goes after Nas. I happen to disagree with this because I believe the verse was already in the tuck. He was just waiting for the perfect moment. Leaving the crowd with the controversial line, Nas don't want it with Hove, is the perfect cliffhanger for something greater planned later down the road. He was just simply setting up the stage for an inevitable main event. Although this video was focused on the Blueprint weekend, there are elements of the album that were conjured up outside of that period, including the one and only feature that JAYZ has on the project with Eminem. The same goes for acquiring Q-Tip, Biz Markie, and Slick Rick for the track Girls, Girls, Girls. And on that note, I want to segue into the overall track list. If there was anything that I could change on this album to make it greater than what it already is, here's what it would be. First, we start off with The Ruler's Back, produced by Bink, which is the perfect opener for this album. In the first verse, JAYZ focuses on the court cases that he was going through at that time. This is JAYZ putting himself in the position of being Mr. Untouchable, and the majority of the tracks that follow help prove that claim. Next up, we get Takeover, which clearly stays on this track list. I mean, we don't get one of the most iconic rap battles of all time without it. Moving on to H to the Izzo, this is a track that I feel hasn't aged well over time. However, with the Cold Crush line still being relevant today, and this being one of Kanye West's early production credits, it has to stay. With Girls, Girls, Girls produced by Just Blaze, I feel like this is the better single out of the two, and I love the addition of 3 legendary MCs helping out with the chorus. Next, we got Jigga That Nigga produced by Trackmasters, which is the first misstep on this album. I mean, this shit sounds like it should have been left in 1998. It comes across as a track that was originally produced for an earlier project, and it doesn't fit the narrative here. It sounds like something JAYZ would have recorded at around the time that he was working on the Rush Hour soundtrack, and it doesn't share that same soulful energy that the album is known for. If it was up to me, I would have taken this off and replaced it with Just Blaze's lyrical exercise. It doesn't have a soulful feel, but it definitely follows the narrative of the album if we take into consideration You Don't Know, which pops up later on in the track list. Speaking of You Don't Know, can you imagine getting lyrical exercise and You Don't Know back to back on Blueprint? That would have been crazy. This track doesn't move, and it's probably the most iconic record off the project. Sadly, I can't say the same about the Timbaland produced track Olahu Vito. This track has to go. Although it's not as terrible as Jigga That Nigga, I just feel like it's not a great fit for this project. And the whole if I'm not better than Big, I'm the closest one line is a little cringe. So yeah, I would have left this off and moved straight into Heart of the City, which is the first track that was recorded for this album. After that, I would have kept everything else the same on this album with the exception of maybe taking off the remix to Girls, Girls, Girls. I just think it's a little bit of overkill and it's nowhere near the original track. So by removing 2 tracks and replacing one with a hidden gem, I think it would have made this project that much more memorable. But there's really nothing you can say that'll take away from its status. This album shows JAYZ at his peak and he is well aware of those circumstances. It put his producers on high alert and brought out the best in them. The Blueprint weekend is an iconic moment in hip-hop history and it still gets talked about today. It may not be JAYZ's best, but in my opinion, it's his most important album to date. But you let me know what you think in the comments. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more content, and don't forget, difficult takes a day, but impossible takes a weekend. Peace.